I only had a real short conversation with this man. I handed him my business card that had my radio show information on it. And I said, I promise I won't use your name. I'm just trying to clear up a few things. And some of your guys have been in contact with someone who I know, Dr. Jane Orient, who's one of our top physicians here in Arizona. And they've been telling her that the Border Patrol is coming down with scabies, drug-resistant TB, bacteriological pneumonia, and it's all being covered up. They're doing on-site laundry so they don't carry this stuff home to their families. They're now being infected with scabies, which could be carriers for more serious things like dengue disease and stuff like that. And Dr. Orient was told something that I was told by this Border Patrol agent. He said, do you know about the 100,000 West Africans? And I said, yes. And he said, do you know they're taught to speak Spanish so they'll blend in before they come here? He goes, they admitted that to us. And I said, yes. And I said, that's a CIA operation. And he said, do you know where they're from? And I said, yes, the 7-state region in West Africa where there's a live, uncontained, uncontrollable outbreak of Ebola. And on my show, Dr. Orient, who's very conservative by nature, came out and said it's not a matter of if, but when and where we have an Ebola outbreak in this country. So I've been working really hard on that. And this Border Patrol agent called me after he had read some articles I had written, and he said, there's more that you need to know. And I think he began to trust me because I never printed his name, and I could clearly see his badge. And this was just a chance encounter, Doug. We were traveling to San Diego on vacation. We stopped in Yuma, Arizona to gas and go to the bathroom and get a drink, and there he was. And I just thought, well, I'm going to take advantage of this. And so he calls me back, and he has a friend with him, and he tells me that the UN already has a presence on the border. And I said, how do you know? And he said, well, they've taken 75% of us off live Border Patrol duty, like we do drug busts and this and that. And he said, now we're doing clerical work where we're pretending to process these immigrants. And he said only 10% of them are as advertised in the media, 10% unaccompanied minors. He said the rest are adults or the children are with some kind of guardian or parent. He said that's a lie you're being told. But he said I have to sign in to the detention centers when we go in to procure these people and then take them to an interview room. And he said he has seen the sign-in list. It's electronic. But he says when I go to sign in, I can see, the top 10 names that have signed in above me. And people from the World Health Organization, DHS, as you would imagine, but also the United Nations and various departments of the United Nations are signing in at these Border Patrol controlled areas in the detention centers. And so my articles I've been writing about DHS is going to roll out the UN when there's a pandemic, and that'll be the foothold for the UN to gain a presence in this country that'll be acceptable. But I said there has to be beyond that for the UN to move into the legitimate peacekeeping force that they're going to claim that they are, with the Russian and Chinese soldiers wearing blue helmets coming to get our guns. And in New York they ran an ad about 3 weeks ago for basically gun confiscation experts. And it's right out of their UN New York office. And before they do that, I said they have to have a false flag. And I've been racking my brain thinking about, okay, what could this false flag possibly be? And then I hearkened back to a map that I've been in possession of. In fact, I'm in possession of the entire set of documents. I have a set of documents that was given to me by a retired member of the Department of Agriculture. And she came into possession of it because she was concerned that the massive war games that the U.S. Navy and Air Force were planning off every one of our coastline, including most of our territories, would be detrimental to crop yield. And so she tried to draw attention unsuccessfully. And to the best of my knowledge right now, guys, I'm the only one in the country that has the map, and it's on the article right at the top, that shows this massive war game. Now, that map comes from an organization called AFAST, which is the sonar aspect of the Navy. And what they're doing, all those rectangles on the map, and if people want to look at it, they go to commonsenseshow.com and look right on there, and you'll see the map pull right up. You'll see oblong rectangles and squares and stuff. And it basically incorporates almost every aspect of the coastline of the three United coastlines, except for the Gulf. There's some areas in there in the Gulf that are barren, and I think largely because those areas are destroyed from the Gulf oil explosion, or they could be being left purposely open. So in 2009, the Navy announced their intention to do a 5-year war game. No one does a 5-year war game. No one. No one usually does a 30-day war game. And this is a 5-year war game, and I have letters. And one of them is published in the article down in the bottom in the area I titled Appendix, that's written by some of the congressional members of California, Oregon, and Washington. And in fact, later, this was joined onto by Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer and Henry Waxman. They added their names on at a later time. They wrote to the Undersecretary of the National Oceanographic Administration and asked him to stop the Navy from doing these war games because of all the mammals they would destroy with the sonar and the missiles and the drills and all this stuff. And NOAA turned them down. So they took their plea directly to the Secretary of the Navy, B.J. Penn, and this is back in, I think, April of '09. And Penn just dismissed them, said, you're not going to tell us how to conduct our business, and told them to go away. Now, you would think that if the congressional delegations of Oregon, California, and Washington would come out and say, you can't do these war games because they're going to destroy our coastline, they're going to destroy millions of mammal life, and this sonar is unwarranted, it's going to harm everything in the area, you got to stop. You think this would make major media. You think this would be all over Fox. It would, but no. I mainstreamed, researched this. It's not there, but I have all the documents. And people can satisfy themselves that I put some of those documents in this article this morning. Here's what it means, Doug, and this is where I think we can cut right to the chase here. The question I asked sarcastically and rhetorically in my article, are the ships facing the coastline or are they facing out? Because yesterday I put the map in my article, and I asked people, tell me what this war games are doing here for 5 years. And most people wrote in and says they're going to try to keep us from escaping when martial law comes. That was the most consistent guess. And I think that's logical looking at the map, but it's not right. They're using sonar. What do you look for when you use sonar? You look for submarines.
Big fish.
Big fish. Big fish that fire big fish.
That's right.
And if you want to take down the grid, and I don't think the entire grid's coming down. That's another aspect I'm actually writing about in tomorrow's article. The Chinese have weapons, EMP weapons, that they can take out localities. They can take out a section, a region, a state, or three-state area, but they don't want to take over a nation that's entire grid system is down permanently. And we're talking, if you took a grid down in the most common way that people think of it, you're going to see a situation where you're not going to have much to inherit. 90% fatalities, according to the Naval War College, after 2 years. My Congressman Trent Franks, has been beating this bandwagon to harden our power supplies and our power grid, against an EMP attack, and no one's listening to him. I think he's being very responsible. I'm not a big fan of his, but in this area, he's right. But these ships are out there looking for an EMP attacker. And there's no question in my mind that's what they're doing. And I saw some hard proof of this, too. When we were in San Diego on the vacation I mentioned, we toured the Midway, that's in mothballs now, it's turned into a museum. And across the bay, you should be able to see all the ships there in San Diego Harbor that are Navy ships. The only ship they had was a tugboat. We went over and ate lunch on the other side of the bay where you could really see the ships up close, tugboat. Now, before we were done with our meal, a destroyer came into port. But I'm hearing these reports that a lot of these ships are now out to sea on a rotating basis. This is an ongoing war game. I got the congressional letters and the documents and the map that show it. And yet, this is going nowhere. Now, why are they looking for an EMP attack? Well, I think the military is afraid they're going to be destroyed before the UN take over. I think the UN is waiting to roll out their troops until they do an EMP that would cripple the military who might stand up and oppose their takeover. The prime directive of any institution, military, education, medicine, is to survive, stay intact, operate. And this is why I think we're seeing a lot of our ships and our Air Force and submarine contingent involved in these drills. And I think they're opposing what's going on. Now, I've said this on the show. I've had my military insider sources said that there would have already been a major coup against this administration if they had the popular support of the people, but the majority of the people are too dumbed down. So in the article today, I said the military is not on the same side as the administration. And I went back and I recounted what I had reported a long time ago about how Admiral Guyette and General Ham, the commander of AFRICOM, Guyette, the commander of Carrier Task Force 3, two of the top 4 commanders in the Middle East, committed mutiny against Barack Obama by trying to rescue Ambassador Stevens. And the reason, and Jim Garrow said this to me, I've had other people in my confidential source arena tell me this, they were going to try to save they're going to try to save Stevens because he would have sung about drug running, gun running, child sex trafficking, all to raise money to support regime change, giving it to Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, and regime change in Libya and then in Syria. And that would have brought down this administration, which is what the military wants. But the number 2s in the command of each officer arrested them. And in General Ham's case, it was a Colonel Rodriguez of the CIA. And Obama has done a lot of this, and I'm sure you've heard this, that in a lot of the major commands, Obama is embedding CIA people as the executive officer to keep a watch on the commanders.
Well, okay, no, wait a second, Dave. How does that work? Okay, because
if you're let's say you're a colonel, okay, and your name is Colonel Rodriguez, and you've been working for the CIA. You just get conveniently transferred over to General Ham's command, and he's told this is your XO.
But wait a second, though. Isn't, for example, a CIA? Now you've got CIA case officers, you've got CIA agents, then you got CIA operatives, and then, of course, different classifications of different positions within the CIA. Now, having said that, don't you have to be a military officer?
Yes. Yeah, the man who arrested Ham and stopped and aborted the attempted rescue of Ambassador Stevens and his bodyguard contingent is a colonel. And he assumed command of AFRICOM temporarily after that. And I do not have the name of the man who arrested Guyette. My source would not give it to me. Guyette was taken. I do know where they took him. They took him to Bremerton, Washington, at the base there. They held him under house arrest, and they said if he said anything, he'd disappear in the NDA, and no one would ever hear from him again. They'd just say he had a heart attack and bury him. That's what he told one of his sources, and it got back to my source. They allowed him to leave the military on pretty favorable terms. But I want you to hear the excuse. This was actually reported in ABC about Guyette's departure. They said he left because of inappropriate comments and actions towards minority members in his command. In other words, here's a guy who's worked his way to the top of being a carrier task force commander, and he doesn't know how to talk to African Americans, Latinos, people of Muslim background in his command. Are you kidding me? You get to that level and you can't deal with a multiracial military force?
Yeah, that doesn't sound right. Obviously, yeah.
No. So, and here's the other thing I wrote in the article today. These two men didn't decide unilaterally and arbitrarily to disobey a presidential directive delivered to them by Leon Panetta. They didn't do that. They had help from the outside. For them to launch a rescue mission, they'd had to have someone redirect satellites, make sure the traffic corridors were open, get traffic reports, get troop logistics reports in the area. They had to know what their troops were walking into. This was a coordinated effort for a military coup in the Middle East, just in the Middle East, not in Washington, not to arrest Obama, but just in the Middle East. Well, that coup failed. And Ham's career blew up, and Guyette's out of the Navy, and unfortunately it failed. And I'm sure if Stevens was rescued from that, he would have known he was set up, because we know how many times he asked Hillary Clinton to increase his bodyguard patrol. Now, when you move forward from this event, you've got other situations to point to the fact that I'm right. Last November 13th and 14th, you had a drill called the Grid X drill. And that was a drill where you had a simulated takedown of the power grid and how FEMA, DHS, and other agencies would respond to the crisis. What's interesting to me is they invited the Chinese and the Russians to participate. I almost couldn't believe my eyes when I read the NERC report on this, as they said, oh yeah, our Russian and Chinese allies will be here. Are you kidding me? These are the same Russians and Chinese that were threatening to nuke us over Syria in the same time frame. Stay out of Iran, or it'll mean nuclear war. Both countries delivered multiple threats, yet we invite them into a highly secure drill and basically gave them the keys to the car on how to take down our grid. Okay, if that's not enough for you, Doug, today I published a document. It's called a bilateral agreement between FEMA and the Russian Ministry of Defense that permitted 15,000 Russian soldiers to come into the country to train for emergency situations, martial law. Okay, so that's there.
Okay.
And then you and I know, and Steve Quayle, we all have the reports of the Russian soldiers in various communities and so forth and so on. I mean, this is no secret. We've talked about this many times. These are your enforcement troops. They're here to seal the deal when all heck breaks loose. And then you have the Chinese side of it. The solar energy zones, to me, the discovery of what those were, and the fact that they're over land that has massive mineral resources underneath of it, is the most significant thing that came out of the Clay Van Bundy affair. And we know on his ranch, the Chinese were going to have a solar energy zone owned by ENN, which is a military corporation out of China. And this is a way they can bring in their soldiers. And the Chinese are being handed a lot of our solar energy projects. In fact, an article I wrote about Bundy affair back in April, I did a side-by-side analysis of the project in Arizona and the project in Nevada, and they're all the same, and the Chinese are at the heart of all of it. And this is a good way to bring in your troops in ostensibly what would be called an inland port. So the Russians and Chinese troops are here. The UN is positioned. We have massive immigration and a total open border and possible pandemics that could put the country in absolute chaos. And I think the coup de grace is going to be an EMP attack. And I think the reason the military, a lot of the military, is offshore with regard to these military war drills is because they feel they'll survive an EMP attack. If they're on top of a submarine or a cargo ship that launches, if they're in that same area, they're not going to be affected because the submarine say from China, Russia, or North Korea, who also has EMP weapons, they're not going to commit suicide. So I think this is why these war games exist.